This is Dr. Sherry Walling, and you are listening to the Talk Healing to Me podcast.
Welcome to the Talk Healing to Me podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Sherry Walling. She's a clinical psychologist, speaker, podcaster, author, and mental health advocate. Her company, Zen Founder, helps entrepreneurs and leaders navigate transition, rapid growth, conflict, or any manner of complex human experience. She hosts Zen Founder podcast, which has been called a must listen by both Forbes and Entrepreneur magazine. She's also a host of Mind Curious, a podcast exploring innovations in mental health care via psychedelics. Her new book, Touching Two Worlds, explores new strategies for finding wholeness in the aftermath of loss. Her best-selling first book, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Shit Together, combines the insight and warmth of a therapist with the truth-telling mirth of someone who has been there. Sherry and her husband Rob reside in Minneapolis, where they spend their time driving their children to music lessons, and she also has been known to occasionally perform as a circle aerialist. Now, in this episode, we talk about grief and its effects on other areas of life, how to overcome adversity, growing up as a kid with a parent with multiple sclerosis, and the use of creativity and movement for healing. The Talk Healing to Me podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute medical or professional advice. The views expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the host or the production team. Always consult your physician or a qualified healthcare provider regarding any questions you have about a medical condition or health objectives. Listening to this podcast does not create a doctor-patient or coach-client relationship. Dr. Sherry Walling, you're so welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be with you, Karen.
Yeah, it's an honor. We've been trying to get around to this for a while, so thank you for coming on and making time. Honestly, reading out all that you do, I mean, I had to take a few breaths in between all of your accomplishments. Give us a little sense of your journey, Sherry, and what brings you to where you're at now in life.
Ooh, that's a huge question. I will say I've always been sort of deeply curious about the inner workings of people. You know, I think I grew up as a very sort of quiet, serious, observing kind of child. And that very naturally led into the job of a clinical psychologist. But as I pursued my vocation in psychology, I was really, really drawn to very high intensity people. So I spent a lot of my early years as a psychologist working in a military context. And so I was working with people who'd recently returned from combat, lots of sort of big feelings and experiences to work through is probably an understated way to say that. And then really noticed in the people around me. So my husband is an entrepreneur, and the people who were in my living room were starting companies and building software and things like that. And I noticed a lot of similarities, a lot of the similar sort of intensity in my patients that I found in the friends in my living room. And so I sort of pivoted to shift and focus on, the mental health needs of people who are really going all in on their vocation or on building something that is an extension of them. So anyway, it's been a long sort of meandering process. I've not had a traditional life as a psychologist by any stretch of the imagination. But most recently, I've been very focused on grief and especially how very alive people enter grief. And that's because I recently lost both my dad and my brother in a very short time frame. And so a lot of my work in grief is journaling or sort of following my own experiences, but then integrating my life as a psychologist into that work.
Incredible. Sherry, I love how you've used your own pain and turning it into a solution to help others, to help others move through it. Tell me, when you're dealing with, these big feelings that you mentioned, in where you started with military work and people coming back, what do you see is the effects of these big emotions, whatever they might be, and not dealing with them?
Well, I think let's call them edge states. And those are the sort of the experiences that we have that are at the edges of our life. So the incredible, incredible joy we might experience giving birth to a child, or the incredible like desperation, pain, and anguish that we might experience in the aftermath of an assault or some kind of incident of violence. Those are not our day-to-day life. They're edge state experiences. And those experiences have the ability to, kind of crack us open and reshape us. And I think the importance of those moments in our lives is being aware of how that cracking open is happening. And I think many of us, when we're in overwhelm, we want to shut it down. We want to hide. We want to sort of repress those experiences into the corners, especially if they're negative experiences, right? Nobody wants to spend a lot of time talking about or thinking about their most painful events.
Mm.
But when we do that, number one, we miss the lessons, right? We miss the deep growth or transformation that is possible in those experiences. Number two, we risk really undermining the systems of our body, because our body is designed to move through intense emotions, not to hold them still for a long period of time. And so we start to see kind of the breakdown of the immune system, kind of all of the physiological consequences that go along with prolonged chronic stress happen when we ignore or repress or suppress these big emotional experiences.
Yeah. I love the edge state. I've never heard that before.
Mm.
Um, it kind of gives openness to allowing to experience all these things and not making them wrong or pushing them away, and being okay with being like that. And something I'd love to ask you, most or a lot of people listening to you speaking are people with MS, and a lot of
Mhm.
women with MS. And in my experience and in the work that I do, there's, a huge, and my own personal experience, of course, as well. This overwhelming emotion is almost like a grief that you're dealing with for the life that you thought you were going to have before the diagnosis. If it's that type of grief where you're still alive and, nobody has passed necessarily, how would you say is a good way to deal with that type of grief? And yeah, feel free to share your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the use of the word grief here is really, really appropriate, because grief is our emotional reaction to loss, and it's not just loss via death. It can be loss via our health status, or a loss of a relationship, loss of a job. So all kinds of losses can create a grief process within us. I do think that the the experience of grieving death can be a helpful model for people who are experiencing other kinds of grief, because there are a couple of things that we do in grief related to loss by death. And let's just also add the caveat that, like, we don't do this very well. Like, we're not good at grief, period, as a society. But we do a few helpful things that I think can be applied to the experience of a different health status than we expected.
Mm.
One is we name it, we memorialize it. When we lose someone, we often gather our key people, and we gather them for a service, for a day of honoring. This is what I thought would be. This is the life I expected to have with this person, and now they're gone. And this is my emotional experience. And what that does is it names it, it labels it, it gives it time and space, and it gives it community. And memorial services aren't perfect experiences by any stretch of the imagination, but I think there's perhaps something to be gleaned from that for people who are holding the grief of an MS diagnosis. And that is to name it, label it. It's okay to say, I am both strong, powerful, and resilient. And also, I'm in grief about this thing that has entered my life that I didn't ask for and didn't choose and don't want. Those can both be true. So we want to label it, name it, give some expression to those emotions. I mean, maybe there's a ritual, maybe there's a list of things that you thought you would have in your life that maybe won't happen now. And you write it down and you burn it and you release the ashes to the water. There's some exercise that sort of helps you move through these potential places of getting stuck. And then, of course, the integration of other humans. is really tricky because many people will not understand this kind of grief. So you need both the co-journeyers of people who have a similar experience, right? The community of other people who are holding the same diagnosis.
Mhm.
And you need the co-journeyers of the people who have been part of your life up until this point, but you might need to bridge the gap a little bit to really help them understand what grief about this particular part of your life feels like for you. They don't walk in your shoes. They need a little help to know how to be with you in it.
That is beautiful, Sherry. Thank you for explaining that. It is a funny one, especially when you have an identity that you have lived and then this diagnosis is handed to you. It feels like somebody has cracked, a glass ceiling that you didn't know that you had around you. And all of a sudden
Mm,
you're trying to find your feet, or certainly that's what my experience has been. And I certainly found that relationships changed, friendships changed,
yeah.
and there's like this overcompensation for wanting to keep things normal, almost like you're clawing on to staying or trying to stay like things are. And it's overwhelming. And then that, of course, takes up more energy than it needs to. And then, like you said, the other side of that is you're trying to process these big feelings and, have yourself looked after at the same time. It's a circus of emotions, and we'll come back to that word in just a moment.
Yeah.
Sherry, if you don't mind telling us about it, you've had an experience in your own family with MS. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that and what kind of effects you think it had on you? This episode of Talk Healing to Me is sponsored by Clean Boss, the world's most powerful botanical disinfectant and cleaner, created by the one and only Joy Mangano, the legendary inventor behind the Miracle Mop and the woman whose story inspired the movie Joy. And let me just say this, her story saved me. Years ago, at one of my lowest points, sick, uncertain, and starting over, I kept watching that movie on repeat. It reminded me that resilience is real, that you can rise, that there has to be a better way. And that phrase, there has to be a better way, became a guiding light for me. And it's why Clean Boss feels so aligned. Because let's be honest, most so called green cleaners, they don't kill germs. And the ones that do are loaded with toxins, with fumes and warning labels. But Clean Boss is different. Formulated by Joy herself and powered by nature with a little help from Pitbull. Yes, that Pitbull. Clean Boss is a botanically based disinfectant that kills 99.9% of viruses, germs, and bacteria. And it's safe enough to use on your kitchen counters, your baby's high chair, or literally anywhere in your home. No rinsing required. No scary ingredients. It's powerful, safe, and a perfect example of what this podcast is all about. Smart, everyday decisions that add up to real healing over time. So if you've ever found yourself thinking, there has to be a better way, this is it. Check it out at getcleanboss.com/Karen, because healing starts with the small things, and Clean Boss makes those things count.
Sure. So my mom, her name's Marcia. She was diagnosed with MS within the year after I was born. So I'm in my mid 40s now. So she's had MS. That's been part of her life, really most of her adulthood and certainly all of my life. Incidentally, her mother also had an MS diagnosis and had a very, very rapid progression, such that I really had no memory of my grandmother. So, the two women in my life who've had MS have had very different stories with it. But I think growing up with a mom who has MS, as of course, as you know, is a little bit of a tricky one because it's so variable. So sometimes you don't know what you're going to get. My mom has had a fairly stable sort of constellation of symptoms that she's been able to really work her life around how to make it all work. And for her, that's looked like a sort of regimen of swimming and napping and just having as low stress life as possible, eating very carefully, things like that have helped her have a life that has a lot of consistency. But certainly from my childhood, there were times when she would have an attack or, would have an increase in symptoms. And for me as a kid, that felt pretty scary to not know, is she never going to be able to walk again? Or is she always going to have trouble with her eyesight? Or, this sort of sense of what's the future. So the unpredictability of MS, I think, is particularly difficult, especially for children who have wonderful big minds and imaginations about what the world is. But in many ways, her MS for me as a child meant that she was much more present than I think she may have been otherwise, because she responded so well to just kind of a quiet life. That's what she chose. And so she didn't work outside the home when I was a child, which again, I think otherwise she would have. There were just some different ways that it shaped our life that were both painful and scary. And there are some things that I'm grateful for.
Beautiful, Sherry. Thank you. Would you have any advice or do's or don'ts for anybody that's listening that is dealing with MS and has children?
Mm. I think one of the mistakes that we make about kids is we underestimate what they observe and overestimate what they understand. And so I think that it's really helpful for lots of open conversation with young children about what MS is, even sort of scientifically, right? Like let's talk about myelin sheath, sort of, so kids have a sense of some kind of mastery over what's happening, even in the unpredictability of it. And, when my father got cancer, he spent some time living with my family because he was going to Mayo Clinic, which is here in Minnesota where I live. And my children at the time were 8 and 12. And we had lots and lots of conversation about exactly what was happening in Grandpa's body. And I think that helped to at least diminish some of that imagination capacity and replace it with information. And I think that's very, very merciful for kids. This whole idea that, they're too young, they don't understand is sort of true, but minimizes what they're observing. And especially young children are very oriented towards seeing the things that happen around them as their fault, right? That's sort of neurologically where they are. They place themselves in the middle of the universe, and that's as it should be for their brain development. But that can make something like MS really overwhelming for them if the grownups in their life don't do a good job of sort of filling them in on the story.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. And thanks for going there. I'm sure there were times when it was difficult and scary for you, and thank you for sharing so openly that it can make a difference for others as well. So thank you. And your mom sounds like she's doing great, which is
Yeah.
brilliant. So brilliant. Tell us about, what you have discovered around healing and movement and the use of creativity.
Yeah. So I have spent my professional life as a psychologist, right? So we use a lot of words. We talk about feelings and experiences. We do a lot of writing, right? There's a lot of like verbal sort of prefrontal cortex expression that goes into much of the practice of therapy. And there's wonderful reasons for that. But in my own grief journey, I have really been drawn to how to help my body process all of the big emotion that it's holding. And so by sort of luck and circumstance, I ended up finding my way to an aerial practice. So aerial is, if you think of Cirque du Soleil and the fabrics extended from the ceiling where people climb up and roll down and do all those fancy tricks, that's become a deep part of my life and my passion because I've needed that kind of big movement outlet to help process and move through grief. And my own journey with this has really helped me to see the centrality, like the absolute foundational need for us in our big emotional lives, our mental health journeys, to integrate movement, to really integrate our bodies into our expression and our healing practices.
Beautiful. Um, Tell me, like, when you were starting this, was it anything that you had exposure to when you were younger? Like, how did because, like, if I
No.
think about aerial, all I can think of is just circus. That's all I can think of. And I've seen some people do it, like, in Cirque du Soleil or maybe, like, some fancy yoga, but, like, how did you even get there?
Yeah. Well, it's sort of randomly, like I had been doing yoga and I ended up going to a yoga studio that also had aerial. And I moved from California to Minnesota and was sort of looking for an indoor activity. Like it snows a lot here. So, my life as a person who ran outside and liked to surf was no longer relevant and I needed an indoor activity. So I ended up at this yoga studio and was not really that interested in it. I have no dance background. I have very, very limited like gymnastics background. Um, I had had no exposure to this before, but there was something about it. So I just sort of tried a class just for like, hey, I'll give it a try. But because I came into it at a time in my life where I was in so much anguish and turmoil, I think the practice of doing something that was so hard, like it was so uncomfortable. It was so disorientating. I didn't like being upside down. I didn't like spinning. I didn't like being up high. I, came home like bruised and battered after just one or two classes. But I needed something like that. I think I needed that physical experience of conquering something or working through something because it really matched the inner journey that I was on. So I stuck with it. Now I love it.
Amazing. One of the
Good.
questions I was about to ask you, and you've kind of answered it already, was, on your darkest day dealing with grief, what is it? What is it that helps you get from that edge state into
Hmm.
another one? I suppose that is one, but I suppose for somebody that's home, at home listening, that maybe doesn't have an aerial place near them or
Yeah.
doesn't have access to it. Is there anything else that you'd suggest that can help take somebody from that state back into somewhere where they're a bit more comfortable and calm and happy? Ready to turn inspiration into transformation? Join the Inner Circle Book Club, where we explore life changing books that spark energy, confidence, and joy. Each month, we read, reflect, and challenge ourselves with exclusive coaching, powerful insights, and engaging discussions. It's more than just reading, it's about real change. Join us with the link in the show notes and get ready to start your next chapter today. I look forward to seeing you on the other side. Let's grow together.
I think when we think about re regulating or moving from an edge state of big emotion and moving into a more regulated state, that almost always happens through our bodies. So it doesn't have to be circus, but I would say that when someone is really flooded with big emotion, to try to find ways to re anchor in the body, that can be just floating in a swimming pool, sitting in a hot tub, going in a sauna, even having someone in your life just really hold you, squeeze you for like a while, just let your body be in this different state. Touch is, of course, super helpful because if we're being touched or held by a trusted person, their body has the ability to regulate our body. So we start to breathe with them. Our heartbeat starts to match theirs. So I think that we think we have to think our way into calm. And usually it's more efficient to breathe our way into calm or to change our physical state in such a way that it resets.
Beautiful. What a gorgeous answer, Sherry. Thank you. We're about ready for a rocket fire round.
Okay.
You ready? Actually, just what I want to say is, if somebody that's listening is dealing with MS and they'd like some help to discover how to manage their MS symptoms, or if you want to stop worrying about your health or your future and just get back to living that life again, that maybe pre-diagnosis, I've put together a free masterclass And you can go into,
Mm.
it's about 30, 40 minutes. I spent about 2 or 3 months putting it together. So if you do want to take a look at it, it's at www.ms2success.com. So MSTOSUCCESS.com. Feel free to go and take that. Sherry, let's get to the quick fire round. You ready? We've got 10 questions for you.
All right.
All right. First one. If you followed your childhood dream, what would you be doing now?
Pilot.
Yes. Okay. Like airline or
Like
like military
airplane
or
pilot. Well, I
yeah.
wanted to be somebody who like flew into like the really remote places to deliver supplies.
Love that. See, still a helper. Still a helper.
An adventurer, right?
I
Risk
love it.
taker.
Yeah, brilliant. And then number 2, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, you got this, girl. You got this. I spend so much of my young adults, young life, like, am I going to be okay? Just in anxiety. And I would just love to reassure that kiddo that, like, your life turns out very interesting. You got this. Settle in, have a good time, do your work. It'll be okay.
Beautiful. Number 3, who inspires you most?
Oh, my kids, my mom, my husband, the people who I get to witness the details of their lives and how they really show up. Ooh, I'm getting all teary. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's really lovely. You're making me rethink my answers that I've given in podcasts after you saying that. That's really nice. Number
It's the
4.
people you get like a really close view to, right?
Of
That
course
I
you do.
think that really inspire me.
Yeah. It is, when you look at anybody that's close to you and you see them going through anything, whether it's good times or bad times, you do develop this level of respect and,
Hmm.
admiration that it's like, and it's kind of hard, definitely as a parent, because you want to do it for them, right? But
Yeah.
it's never usually the right way. So seeing kids go through that is pretty inspiring. So yeah, thanks for sharing
Yeah.
that. Um, Number 4, was there a particularly dark day that turned into a positive, and what was the lesson?
I mean, I think there's not maybe one particular day, but I lost my brother to suicide, which is a very, very painful way to lose someone. And speaking of the circus, one of my aerial coaches also lost her brother to suicide. And we created a beautiful show telling that story. And so I'm not ready to say it was a positive, but I'm ready to say out of great pain, we created something very beautiful that
Mm,
I'm really proud of. So,
amazing. And I'm so sorry for your loss of your brother and your
yeah,
dad.
thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that journey with us. And I have watched that video that when I say it hit me right in the heart, oh my goodness, it's tear jerking, and we'll link it in the show notes
Yeah,
for
feel
anybody that
free.
wants to go watch it. You absolutely, it's a must watch.
Mm.
Okay, number 5. What does your ideal date consist of?
A picnic in a canoe and like a leisurely day outside, and probably follow that up with some kind of dancing.
Nice. I've
It's a
never heard that
two-parter.
one.
You have to
Yeah,
have
I
the
like
earthy
that.
part and then the like put on a fabulous outfit part.
Very cool. Dr. Michael Bruce was one of his was going to the beach and having ice cream afterwards. But that you've just
Mhm.
leveled up the game there, Sherry, with a canoe, a picnic in a canoe. All I can think is like Rocky and falling off. So good on you. There's a bit of there's a bit of danger in there too. All right, number 6. This might be a bit of an Irish one for you, okay? But if you had a roast dinner, so say it's roast potatoes, carrots, chicken, or nut loaf, or some kind of protein, and some stuffing, would you eat your favorite thing first, your favorite thing last, or a little bit of everything together?
The last one, a little bit of everything.
Yeah, me too. Cool. Number 7. If you had to choose 3 people to join you for dinner, past or with us, who would they be?
Oh my goodness. Um, let's see. My good friend Kelsey, she lives in Toronto, so I don't get to see her very much, but she's the best dinner guest in the history of dinners. Um, I'd love to have some like maybe like Maya Angelou, like just a poet, a wordsmith, someone who's just got stories upon stories and is a good storyteller. And then I definitely like a rock and roller. Um, Trying to think of who that would be. I've been a little obsessed with Florence and the Machines lately, so maybe the lead singer of Florence and the Machines.
Hilarious.
Storytellers.
Nice. Okay, very cool. I'd like to be at that dinner table. Number 8, your favorite song.
Okay, like I cannot commit to this. This is you're asking too much of me.
I know.
Okay, the point in time favorite song, like the one that's on repeat right now, is "Say My Name" by Florence and the Machines. So
Okay.
that's what
You're
I
a
got. It's
big
not
fan.
all-time favorite. It's just like this week favorite.
Okay, we'll take that. We'll take that. Okay, great. We'll link it in the show notes as well, everybody. Number 9, the book that you gift the most. I really hope that you're going to say one of your own ones, Sherry. So maybe you can give a double answer to this.
It would be yeah, I guess it would be a little obnoxious to answer with my own book, but it is so touching. Two Worlds is the whole thing that I want to say to anyone who's going through a hard time. So instead of like sitting down and letting us talk for hours and hours, it's sort of like, here, I wrote it all down. Get to it when you're ready. The other book that I often gift is Let Your Life Speak, which is a little book by a Quaker thinker named Parker Palmer. That's a really lovely book to give to people in transition.
Beautiful. I've never heard of it. I will absolutely go look that up. Thank you.
Yeah.
And number 10, and our final question, how do you switch off?
Well, I usually just go to sleep. I live a really full life, and so I shift from work to family to circus and back again. And so my switching off means cuddling up in bed with my family or my kiddos and going to sleep. I love to sleep. So good.
Yeah, great answer. Okay, awesome. Sherry, thank you so much for joining us. I would love before we go if you could tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, I'm pretty active on Instagram. So if you're into short videos about circus or thoughts about mental health, I'm at Sherry Walling on Instagram and Twitter. And then I have the website sherrywalling.com. And my books are Touching Two Worlds and The Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Shit Together.
Nice. Perfect. Well, we will link all those in the show notes. Dr. Sherry Walling, thank you so much for joining the Talk Healing to Me podcast. We will see you again soon, I hope.
Thanks so much, Karen.
Thank you to our sponsors of this episode. You can visit getcleanboss.com/Karen. And also a thank you to our video and podcast producer and editor, Aoife McNamara at Imagine Media. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to Talk Healing to Me podcast. Sometimes the right piece of info can totally change someone's health journey. So if today's episode resonated with you, please pass it along to someone who might find it useful. And hey, if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and perhaps even leave a review. It helps more people find us, and I'd love to hear what you think. See you next time, and until then, keep healing, keep growing, and keep listening.